Majora's Mask and my relationship with said game is very similar to how public appeal was towards this strange take on The Legend of Zelda. When growing up, I was a pretty big baby. I cried a lot and got scared of the stupidest of things, more than usual. Our Nintendo 64 library consisted of a lot of things that my oldest brother was interested in, since the system was originally bought for him years ago. Madden games, wrestling games, some shitty racing games, we had a fuck ton of them, and I still hold most of them within my collection. Although my father wanted a few games to play himself, meaning we got some big boy games on the system as well, such as GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Nightmare Creatures, Resident Evil 2, and the one that scared me the absolute most, The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. I played our copy of Ocarina of Time quite a lot, and after I had finally beat it, I wanted more to explore. So, in wanting so, I popped in my copy of Majora's Mask, and after about 30 minutes of playing, I turned it off and rushed to change the game back to my tried and true Donkey Kong 64. So what was it about Majora's Mask that scared the absolute shit out of me when I was a child? Well, first of all, the mask transformation animations were terrifying. As a kid who couldn't even watch Jim Carrey's The Mask growing up because the dog scared me too much, this shit was way too much for my little baby brain to handle. As the years progressed, though, I eventually manned up and got into the game proper. I made it to Akana Castle and could not beat the boss with a measly 7 hearts. So then I gave up. At that point in time, being around 13 years old, I considered Majora's Mask too different from the Zelda formula. It was bad because of that. But suddenly, in 2015, when the game was re-released for the 3DS, my interest was piqued again. For some odd reason, I wanted to give it a shot once more, and so, after picking the game up and playing it nonstop for a whole 3-day weekend, I had 100% of the game guideless. So what in the hell happened? How did I end up from being scared of Majora's Mask, to hating it, to it being one of my favorite Zelda games ever? Well, in today's retrospective, I hope to answer that question for not only you, but for myself as well. But enough blabbing on about my funny past self, let's get properly started with my retrospective on The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. Once again, I am not playing the 3DS version for this retrospective, but not the GameCube version either. The game was running like absolute dog shit, and I could not figure out how to fix it, so I decided to give up and was going to plug in my N64 and just hope that you'd be fine with the shitty video quality. However, I was pulling out my Wii U for the next 2 videos I have in store and remembered that I have both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on the Virtual Console, and so that is how I will be playing the game for this video. As for the 3DS version, it isn't as cut and dry as it is for the Ocarina of Time video. I will be reviewing the N64 version and nothing but for this video, as the 3DS version brings a metric ton of changes for better and for worse. If you were to ask me which version I preferred, I would say the N64 version, but that is something that I will get more into, hopefully in my eventual Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3DS video. But for the rest of the retrospective, I will be using the latest releases for the rest of the games, and all of them are on easy to record consoles, and I own all of the HD remakes as of late. After Ocarina of Time's release, Aonuma was given 1 year to develop a new Zelda game for the N64, after the disk drive had failed so miserably in Japan. He was told to use the brand new Ocarina engine, to make a good use of all the time spent on perfecting it. A lot of Majora's Mask's themes are tied around the limits of time, and it is super interesting how they used the predicament they were in to help develop new and interesting ideas that no other Zelda game had or has attempted to do. The game focuses around Link. After the events of Ocarina of Time, everything splits into 3 timelines that are all really dumb and stupid, but I know them pretty well, so I might as well explain it. When Link was sent back in time at the end of Ocarina of Time, he was sent to the child timeline, which is where our story takes place today, while adult Zelda stays in what is known as the adult timeline, consisting of Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks. But over in the child timeline, Link takes his trusty steed Epona and embarks on a mini-quest to go off and find his friend Navi, whom at the end of Ocarina of Time flew off to who knows where. After some time in the Lost Woods, Link gets attacked by the mysterious Skull Kid. Link wakes up to find the Skull Kid stealing his things and rides off on his steed. Link pursues the Skull Kid, leading him to his falling down this crazy asshole. Upon landing, Skull Kid changes Link to the defenseless Deku Scrub and then bolts without a second thought, accidentally leaving Tattle the fairy behind. Pissed at Link, but worried about her brother Tail, she asks Link to team up temporarily to get back to her brother. Reluctantly agreeing, Link then travels forward, leading him to the strange clock tower in which he meets with the happy mask salesman. Seeming to know everything that has happened to Link, he proposes that he can help out Link if he can get back his ocarina, but also a mask that the Skull Kid seems to have stolen from the salesman. But what is the catch to all of this, you might be asking? Well, the Mr. Salesman here needs to leave in the next 3 days, which isn't apparent until you exit the clock tower, entering the main hub of the game, Clock Town. Link then spends the next 3 days going around the town and discovering the dark truth of this strange land. The moon is slowly and surely falling down onto the earth and will destroy the land of Termina in approximately 3 days. Through these next 3 days, we see Tattle start to really despise the Skull Kid for the shitty things that he's been doing to people, including people like the Great Fairy, who was split apart due to his powers, or the Bombers, whose group was infiltrated and given a bad name due to the Skull Kid fucking it all up, meaning Deku Link cannot join due to their hesitancy, or even just the fact that he has decided to descend the moon onto the land, leaving soldiers reluctant to hold their posts, families seeking refuge in nearby towns. The mayor is in a predicament where he cannot decide which side of the people to agree with, those who wish to stay and celebrate the annual festival, or run and try to enjoy the most of their lives as they can. Eventually though, the time is coming to an end, and Link meets back up with the Skull Kid. After Tail gives some cryptic bullshit, Link snot shoots the Skull Kid and gets his Ocarina of Time back. Upon getting it back, Link is reminded of the Song of Time that Zelda taught him and plays the tune, sending him and Tattle back in time to the first day of the cycle. The happy mask salesman is happy for Link and teaches him the Song of Healing, being able to heal the woes of the Deku Scrub he was fused with and allowing him to turn back into a real boy. The mask salesman then tells Link that he needs to get back that mask, known as Majora's Mask, before Skull Kid uses its powers to truly wreak havoc upon the land that is Termina and crash the moon onto the land. And with that, Link and Tattle recall what Tail told them of the 4 giants and to bring them to Clock Town, and off they go to do just that in hopes to be able to save this small town from its impending doom. The story of Majora's Mask, when compared to later entries, and even earlier ones at that, has a very simple plot that does not progress whatsoever from here until the very end of the game. Link's job is to go to the 4 areas of Termina, one being Woodfall, home to the Dekus, who is imprisoned a poor monkey under a false accusation for kidnapping the Deku princess. Another being Snowhead Mountain, which is stuck in a forever winter, killing off the Gorons who have just lost their most powerful leader, Darmani. Another being the Great Bay, which is being ravaged by a terrible storm, and the popular singing Zora Lulu has lost her eggs and is now fallen into a perpetual silence. Mikau, a Zora warrior, in an attempt to retrieve them, is killed by the pirates that stole them. And finally, there's Ikana Valley, which is just reeking of death and despair. There's a father who has become a monster, and this poor daughter locks him up and protects him, and hopes to someday, hopefully, be able to get her father back the way he was before. The castle shows us the great Ikana King, and long ago his land fell in such cruel and disgusting methods that it now sits in ruin. The land of Termina is a mess, and every chunk of the land has its own huge problems. But despite all of their own personal and different issues, they are all facing the same larger problem at the exact same time. The fear of their impending death as it comes closer and closer every second, and that there is nothing they can do to stop it. Majora's Mask is such a strange game in which subject material is the only game in the series to present itself in the way that it does. Instead of telling the player how they should feel and presenting a fall, a progression of building their arsenal, and then a final huge climactic ending, Majora's Mask decides to do things a lot differently. Instead of telling you, they show you, and they let you read between the lines. The best part of Majora's Mask is not the main plot. Hell no, that shit is basic, though a bit cool in concept. The best part of Majora's Mask, hands down, is Ocarina of Time's biggest weakness: side quests. In Ocarina of Time, progression worked in a way where the game wanted you to explore the world in order to get the tools needed to progress to the next location. The issue that we discussed in the original Ocarina of Time video was that they did this in an obtuse way that made progression seem nonsensical. In Majora's Mask, they do this in a way that works fantastic, but not by changing it all too much. The first thing to note is that nothing seems like a crazy stretch of logic. No more bombing Gorons or feeding fish to Lord Jabu Jabu. If there is a wall that you need Epona to jump over, well, go find Epona and do what it takes to get her to get there. Is there a giant cliff that you can't climb without some tool? Well, wait until you unlock the hook shot and use that to get up there to progress some more. Not only are there things you're supposed to do more logical, but also they are more fun to find and accomplish. Side quests are the meat that fills Majora's Mask's bones. There are a lot of small quests, like listening to Guru Guru's story to gain the Bremen mask, or helping stop the arguments that fill the mayor's office with the couple's mask to gain a piece of heart. Or larger quests, like Romani's Ranch, that you do a training montage, fight some aliens, and then fight out the Gorman brothers to help get milk to the milk bar in Clock Tower. Or the famous one, the Anju and Cafe side quest. You cannot talk about Majora's Mask without mentioning Anju and Cafe. In this quest, you're trying to help both Anju and Cafe in being able to share their wedding vows to one another and form their wedding mask to form the couple's mask. The issue lies in that Cafe is missing, and in some snooping and investigation you find that Cafe has been cursed, and his sun mask, which was supposed to be given to Anju on their wedding day, was stolen. In doing this full 3-day quest, ending right at the end of the third day, you finally get to see these two together and happy. This moment feels so fantastic and helps really make the world of Majora's Mask feel so full of life. If you recall, in Ocarina of Time, it had characters, but for me, they were fun, but they weren't deep enough for me to truly enjoy. Majora's Mask helps flesh out a metric ton of its characters and makes the entirety of Termina feel so much more real. None of them are crazy deep, like some JRPG characters, but they actually have hopes and dreams and fears and personalities that most games don't even think to add, which makes this game feel so much more worth playing. Yes, you want to play Majora's Mask because it is fun to do Zelda stuff, I get it, I do too, but when it comes down to it, you want to do these side quests to help these people because you don't want to see them in peril. You want to help them out and make everything just go away. Fix their worries and heal their woes to allow them another tomorrow that isn't full of fear and anxiety. Well, at least I want to. So what is the reason for doing all these side quests? Well, just like Ocarina of Time, and along with the rest of the games in this series, Majora's Mask also has one specific collectible that is unique to the game. Masks. Masks in Majora's Mask have one of 3 purposes, and the effectiveness of said purpose varies. The first purpose is the transformation masks. While there are technically 5 of these masks, there are only 3 that you will actually be using throughout the game. Remember when Link got turned back into a human after being temporarily transformed into a Deku Scrub? Well, that previous form was turned into a mask, and alongside the 2 other masks, being the Goron mask from the deceased Goron tribe leader Darmani, and the deceased Zoran guitarist Mikau. These masks grant Link that ability to transform back and forth between all 4 forms, including human Link himself. Not only does this make progression fun, but it also is able to add a lot to the puzzles within the dungeons. One specific example of this being done would be the fire at the bottom of Snowhead Mountain. There's fire that damages Link and straight up kills Deku Link. However, the fact that there is a larger than average button within the fire, and you have just obtained the Goron Link mask, helps key the player into the fact that Goron Link does not take damage from fire or lava when walking on it. This happens a lot within Majora's Mask, and it is really cool. The other 2 transformation masks, being the Giant's Mask and the Fierce Deity's Mask, are both only used for specific boss fights and cannot be used outside of their respective places. Another type of mask would be the ability masks. These masks are super neat as they help add to the abilities that human Link holds himself. The bunny hood is the most obvious example, but for fair reason. It almost doubles regular Link's base running speed, helping traverse feeling a lot less tedious throughout Termina. The last and least cool type of masks are side quest specific masks. These, when obtained, are only ever used for one other occasion just to get a piece of heart or some kind of other reward. One example that I stated earlier is the couple's mask. Wearing this rewards Link with a piece of heart, and then the mask ends up sitting in Link's arsenal doing absolutely nothing for the rest of the game. It is super disappointing that the game has this issue, and I wish that Nintendo would have maybe lessened the amount of masks and tried to give them all abilities, or at the very least multiple uses throughout the multiple side quests. Sadly though, as they stand, most masks are just there for the sake of completion. After poorly rambling about my adoration for the side content, let's talk about the main game and what it has to bring to the table, that is Majora's Mask. Well, to start off, most of the 4 main areas have great opening segments and fantastic dungeons. 3 of the 4 dungeons in this game I look forward to every single time I play this game. They are so well designed to test you, but also everything inside of them is fun to do as well. My favorite is easily the Stone Tower Temple. The puzzles and whatnot are super fun to figure out. Having to find out where and which of the statue transformations to use is a fascinating idea that helps the first half of progression feel super great. And right around the time that idea becomes tiresome, they introduce the flipping of the tower all Symphony of the Night style, meaning the second half of the dungeon is technically in the places you've already explored, which is super awesome. Snowhead is also really good dungeon design, in which you have to find the places to lower the center, allowing you to progress further until you find the dungeon boss room. Every dungeon has gimmicks that work at changing the state of the entire dungeon and ask the player to think more on a grander scale than just the specific room they're in, which is what makes the game's dungeons so fantastic. However, there is one that I said I don't look forward to, and that dungeon would be the Great Bay Temple. Now, don't get me wrong, this is probably the best temple in the game, and is definitely the strongest at what I mentioned for changing the whole temple on the grander scale. However, I personally find the means of progressing within this temple to be very belittling to the overall quality of said temple. The swimming is fun, that I cannot deny, but when you forget something and need to backtrack, you run into the same issue I did back with the water temple in Ocarina of Time. You need to go back 5 rooms to deactivate something, then activate something else, then go forward 3 rooms, do what you forgot to do, then travel back 3 rooms, and reverse everything you had just activated and deactivated. Things just get a little too tedious, and it is why I only ever started having fun with the Great Bay Temple on repeat playthroughs, when I have a larger grasp on how things progress. Now, one thing I have been reluctant to mention is the stray fairies. Early on, you find out that all 4 sections of the map have a great fairy that rules over the land. All of them have been split up from the Skull Kid and spread out within the temples. When entering any temple, you can find 15 stray fairies hidden all around the place, and when you find all 15 and bring them back to their respective fountain, you will be rewarded with the power-up of some sort. That being double defense, a larger mana pool, or even a great fairy sword that is super cool on paper, but works kind of poorly when being stuck to one of the C buttons. The way that straight fairies work, that means that if you forgot to drop them off or cannot find one before the time of the 3-day cycle ends, you have to go back to the Retrospective Temple and re-find all 15 fairies. The way Majora's Mask works is that only certain items can be brought back in time, such as main plot items, masks, pieces of heart, but things such as bombs, rupees, and stray fairies cannot come back with you. And when I was a child first playing Majora's Mask, that shit pissed me off so much. However, now that my tolerance has increased and my taste in video games has plummeted to unrespectable, I can assure you that this mechanic is what makes Majora's Mask truly as great as it is. Now, before I talk about how fantastic the game mechanics are, and because I forgot to transition this more organically, let's talk about leading up to these temples. Each area has a task that you must complete to gain the means in order to enter the Retrospective Temple. In the swamp, you need to help Kotake in the woods in order for her to ride you to the Deku Palace, in which you must infiltrate and get the Sonata of Awakening from the monkey. In Snowhead, you need to find the Elder Goron to teach you the lullaby in order to put not only the baby Goron to sleep, but also put this giant Goron to sleep who is in your way. In Great Bay, you need to infiltrate the Pirate's Fortress and Pinnacle Rock in order to obtain all of Lulu's Zora eggs, teaching you the new wave Bossa Nova. In Ikana Canyon, you must make your way through the Giddo Well, helping to get you to Ikana Castle, where you'll learn the Elegy of Emptiness, which will help you climb the Stone Tower, getting you to the entrance. All of these are great in setting up the setting and characters of each region of Termina. None of them wear out their welcome too much, aside maybe the constant leaving needed in Ikana for new players who wouldn't know they need a powder keg or a blue potion and milk just to progress. But cool, now that's out of the way, let's gush about how lovely those mechanics are. Majora's Mask runs off a 3-day system. You know this much already. The way it works is that every single day, every single minute, the NPCs are repeating their 3-day schedule to absolute nauseum. It's a time loop, meaning that this sort of thing would be absolutely expected. The only time you will see a break in these seemingly simple and repetitive schedules is by interfering and changing what happens within. When turning back the clock at any point in the 3-day cycle, everything that you worked on that cycle is turned back to the way it was before. You haven't done anything this cycle. Why would that be different? This aspect of the game not only works in a mechanical sense, but in my opinion adds to the game in a thematic sense as well. As I mentioned earlier, Majora's Mask dabbles in themes of impending doom and lingering death. The idea that no matter how hard Link may try, that the 3-day cycle will end and he will have to turn back the clock. It's haunting. Speaking of turning back the clock, a part of the game I want to mention is the Final Hours track. This piece of music is so freaking good at setting this uneasy and disturbing tone that I have only ever heard replicated in similar ways is classic Resident Evil games. It's just that great. This isn't the only song in the game that is great as well. Music is something that I didn't really mention all too much in Ocarina of Time, which looking back was a bit of a shame since Ocarina of Time does have some fantastic tracks. One thing we will be seeing going forward is that Zelda is always consistent at delivering wonderful music tracks that can evoke a variety of emotions in fantastic ways. Majora's Mask, however, has the better soundtrack between it and Ocarina, if you were to ask me. From the Deku Palace, to the Stone Tower Temple theme, to the Final Hours we were just discussing, to especially the end credits theme, this game has a very solid soundtrack that will get outbeat by later entries, but still remains high tier amongst the entire franchise. This script has been sort of a mess from the start, and for that I do apologize. Majora's Mask is just one of those games that I've always struggled to put into words. There's just something about it that always keeps you coming back, that you just cannot explain well enough to do it justice. But instead of rambling onward just to lengthen the video, we'll start the ending story bits now. After getting all 4 giants, Link and Tattle call them and are able to finally stop the moon from crashing into Termina. However, Tattle and Tail's reunion is cut short by none other than Majora herself, who was inside the mask and controlling Skull Kid all along. The moon starts to crash more violently now, and Majora escapes into the moon, with Link and Tattle following close behind. Inside the moon, the final temple of the game, is a really strange and interesting temple and set piece within Majora's Mask. It's just a tonal shift from everything that Link has just experienced within Termina. Everything is peaceful and calm, with nothing but the sounds of the wind and the birds. There is a single tree in the middle, with 5 children, and only 4 of them are playing, while the 5th is sitting against the tree. If you collected all the masks at this point in the game, you're able to talk to the 4 children with the 4 boss heads from throughout the game. They each bring Link challenges based on their respective temples, along with deep and existential questions on the meaning of happiness and the purpose of reality and the people you surround yourself with. After all of these encounters, you face off with the titular Majora herself and the final boss. If you complete all 4 challenges, you will obtain the Fierce Deity's mask, my favorite mask looks-wise in the game. The design is absolutely badass, and the functionality of it absolutely breaks Majora's boss fight into pieces. But if you decide not to use it like I did for the first time while recording this footage, then the boss fight is pretty great. 3 phases, all with different and interesting attacks. The boss isn't difficult, not really, but it is far more interesting than Energy Tennis with Ganondorf, so I must give credit when credit is due. But when Link does beat Majora and finally puts a stop to her reign, everything just becomes whole again. The new day begins, and we see Anju and Kafei finally getting married. We see Romani all happy on the ranch. The Zoras are performing finally, with Lulu singing once again. The Gorons are finally unfrozen and complete. Akana is inhabited once again. But as Majora's Mask will subtly remind you a few times within the credits, just because the larger threat was finally fixed, not everything was saved. The Deku Butler still lost his only son. The Skull Kid is still outcast from his friends. Link is still missing Navi. However, they all still push on, with smiles on their faces and happiness within their hearts. Sorry, that was a pretty awful line, but what I'm trying to say is that Majora's Mask teaches us that no matter how dire or depressing or downright awful that your situation can get, it is always important to keep pushing forward and make sure you end up on top of whatever is keeping you down. Majora's Mask was a game that when it came out, a lot of people considered it too large of a departure from the Zelda formula to be considered a sequel to Ocarina of Time. As time passed, however, people started to really understand the charm and fun that was in Majora's Mask. Now, whenever you find people discussing the game, it isn't an uncommon opinion to consider it superior to Ocarina, saying it does everything better. But where do I fall within it? Well, first of all, I would like to say I like Majora's Mask more than Ocarina of Time, easily. This has been the case for me since I completed the game back in 2015. But to say that Majora's Mask is better than Ocarina of Time wouldn't be the right thing to say at all. They are two totally different games telling two totally different kinds of stories. Ocarina of Time talks of legacy and building a captivating tale to be told generation to generation. Majora's Mask is living in the present and giving subtle signs to many different tones and themes it could be talking about. Ocarina of Time is focused on its main plot and the many different temples you can find within, while Majora's Mask focuses on the connected world and interesting NPCs and less of an overarching narrative. They are hard to compare, and because of that fact, I won't. Majora's Mask is one of my favorite Zelda games ever, but it is not my favorite. It excels in everything it says, both intentionally and unintentionally. It is a brilliant game through and through, and is very fascinating how it came from the black sheep that nobody wanted to even think about to probably the second most acclaimed game in the series. It took some time, but people finally came around to the terrifying brilliance that is Majora's Mask.